After reading the book, I'm actually glad they made certain changes in the movie, which is something I never thought I would say. Hi, I'm Lucky's Universe, and in this week's video we are doing my November reading wrap-up because for once this year I've actually read a decent amount of books. Now I know what you've all been thinking. Lucky, where the hell have you been, Loka? I dropped off the face of TikTok, stopped posting on Instagram, and ghosted YouTube for like the 10th time. Honestly, by now you guys should be used to me disappearing and reappearing and acting like I never left. It was kind of heartwarming seeing the amount of comments on my TikTok videos asking if I was still alive. Without being too lengthy, I'm back? I decided to leave TikTok semi-permanently because despite having 500,000 followers, the environment on TikTok at the moment is not great. Especially in the fantasy romantasy space, it's getting scary out there. After my time away, I realized I do really prefer this long form content on YouTube because it gives readers space to fully explain their ideas and opinions, and there's less pressure to add in like shock value or rage bait for views. So although my TikTok is basically dead and gone, I have revived my Instagram and am posting regular book content on there, reviews, recommendations, fun stuff, so go give me a follow if you're not already. But we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about books. So grab your tea, I'm drinking green tea today in my new My Melody mug, and without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we're talking about The Sanatorium, which I actually started in October, but I finished it in November. The Sanatorium is about a UK detective named Ellen, who has taken a year of leave following a traumatic event at work and is considering whether or not to return to the force. She and her boyfriend Will are invited to her brother's engagement party in a luxury hotel in the Swiss Alps. And we soon learn that Ellen has a bit of unresolved business with her brother Isaac. Not long after they arrive, the hotel staff start going missing and then turning up dead wearing these strange, ancient-looking gas masks, which Ellen thinks might be connected to the hotel's history as a sanatorium for tuberculosis sufferers. An avalanche renders the local police unable to assist, so it's up to Ellen to solve the case while tackling her difficult relationship with her brother and the growing rift between her and Will. This book was lined up to be a solid 4-star, but I knocked off an entire star for the ending. But before we get into that, maybe let's talk about what I did like. I liked the setting. There's obviously something inherently spooky about an old sanatorium being refurbished into a luxury hotel. There's lots of doors open for ghosts and cold cases and mysteries from the past. Add in the isolation of the Swiss Alps and you've got yourself a pretty good setup for a thriller. The book actually does a really good job of weaving in mystery with like the relationship drama and mixing in a fair amount of like suspense. What really ruined it for me is the age-old plot of nobody believing the protagonist, and thus she is forced to do dangerous stuff by herself. I just know that the author was searching for conflict to bulk up the story, but I became increasingly frustrated as the story went on as Ellen continued to put herself in dangerous situations and completely disregard the danger. For what? It would make sense if she was a civilian character, but the whole point of her character is that she is a detective. So her just like running off into danger doesn't make any sense. And her taking all of those risks really took me out of the story because I could just feel the author trying to make certain scenes happen. The cherry on top of my poor rating was the ending. I obviously won't give away anything if you want to read it, but the ending essentially makes everything that happened in the book pointless. The person who is kind of set up to be the antagonist and is like a real asshole is just forgiven, no context needed, and everything that they did in the book is forgotten. And it's almost like the author was setting us up for a sequel, but there is no sequel. I rated this book 3 stars, which for me is low, but I would still recommend it to readers who like that spooky asylum setting and relationship drama, but I'd be very interested to hear what other people thought of the ending, so let me know if you've read this book. Next, I read The Long Walk by Stephen King. I'm not much of a horror fan, which is why I haven't branched out into Stephen King before, but I watched the movie, I liked it, and it gave me more YA dystopian vibes than horror, which is why I thought it might be something that I would like. If you haven't watched the movie or read the book, The Long Walk is set in a dystopian version of America, where each year 100 boys aged 13 to 18, I think, compete in a competition called The Long Walk. The name is pretty self-explanatory. You walk, you have to maintain a speed of 4 miles per hour in the book, and you just don't stop until only one boy remains. If you slow down, you die. The book is quite short. It follows the main character, Ray Garrity. The plot is completely focused on the walk, and we don't learn that much about the world around us, how the walk came to be, the state of the world, anything like that, which I don't think is completely necessary if you have a compelling enough plot. I did some background, and apparently Stephen King wrote this novel as an allegory for the Vietnam War, where so many young men signed up for this war because it was sold to them as a quest of bravery and honor, only to then face horrors and return home forever changed, or just not return at all. This definitely lines up with The Long Walk, because unlike similar concepts like the Hunger Games where children are forced to compete, The Long Walk is completely voluntary. And so many boys apply each year that there is a wait list. There are set points with each of the core characters where the reality of what they've signed up for sets in, and they realize that they have to walk without stopping, that there's 99 other boys walking, and the pure stupidity of believing that they would be the one to win. But still, the supervisor of the Long Walk is this omnipresent character called the Major, appears every now and then to deliver rousing speeches about bravery, honor, resilience, sacrifice. It's really sad, because by the time the reality sets in, the boys don't have a choice. They can't stop or they're gonna die. After reading the book, I'm actually glad they made certain changes in the movie, which is something I never thought I would say. The movie has stronger bonds between the characters, especially the two main characters, which is Garrity and McVries. They also took out Garrity's weird sexual inner monologue. I get that he's a horny teenager, but it was uncomfortable at times. Ultimately, it is a 4-star read. It didn't blow my socks off, but it was definitely a book that I had to sit with for a bit after I finished reading it, and then the more I thought about it, the sadder I got. I don't know if this has convinced me to read any more of Stephen King's work, but if any of you guys have read it, let me know what I should try. Next up is probably the first Agatha Raisin book that I didn't enjoy, and that is Agatha Raisin and the Terrible Tourist. Not to be confused with Agatha Christie, Agatha Raisin is about a plucky 60-ish-year-old woman who retires early from her fast-paced PR job in London and goes to live in a small village in the Cotswolds. Despite wanting to live the little village life, Agatha craves fame, attention, and the affections of her hot neighbor, James. Each book follows Agatha Raisin as she solves different murders in the village. I originally started reading the Agatha Raisin series out of order, which you definitely can do, but this year I decided to just start from the beginning and go chronologically and see where we end up. Terrible Tourist is book 6, and in a nutshell, Agatha and James were about to get married in book 5, but then Agatha's husband, who she thought was dead, turns up, ruins the wedding, and then he gets murdered and Agatha has to solve his murder. But at the end of book 5, James decides to end their relationship and he goes off on their pre-planned honeymoon to Cyprus alone. Book 6 is about Agatha following James to Cyprus in a desperate attempt to win him back. And then in true Agatha Raisin fashion, she gets caught up in an overseas murder mystery. I usually enjoy Agatha Raisin books. Agatha is funny, the murders are always ridiculous and creative, and so like you never really get bored. The books are really short, and I always listen to the audiobooks because the narrator, Penelope Keith, just brings Agatha to life in the best way. The plot of Terrible Tourist wasn't actually what put me off. It was more the understanding that this book was written in the 90s/early 2000s, where casual racism was a lot more acceptable. I got the feeling that Agatha's casual racism was meant to be funny, but then after the first few jokes, I just started to get really sick of it. Sometimes when books are written in a completely different time period, you do have to make allowances for certain phrases and lines. But this is the 90s/early 2000s, and by that time I really don't think it's an excuse. None of the other Agatha Raisin books I've read have contained this sheer amount of casual racism and microaggressions, so I was really disappointed. I rated it 2 stars, and I'm really hoping that none of the other books in this series skew in that direction. Next is Dragonfly and Amber. It took me 3 months to read this book, and I felt every page. Dragonfly and Amber is the second book in the Outland series, which follows our protagonist Claire as she accidentally time travels to 18th century Scotland before the Battle of 45, which saw to the destruction of all Highland culture. While there, Claire falls in love with the Scottish rogue Jamie Fraser and eventually decides to remain in the 18th century with him, abandoning her husband in the future, whose name is Frank. The second book starts with a cliffhanger. Claire, for some reason, is back in the future. She also has a child named Brianna, who she has been raising with Frank. Obviously, so many questions. Where is Jamie? Why is Claire back in the future? After Frank's death in 1968, Claire has taken Brianna to Scotland with the intention of telling her everything about Jamie, about the time travel, all of it. Then we go back in time to Claire, in 1745. She's still with Jamie at this point, and the majority of the story is about Claire and Jamie because they're now exiled in France and they're trying to prevent the Battle of 45. It's a good premise because we know from the beginning that something has gone wrong, because there is no way that Claire would ever return to the future unless something had happened to Jamie. Although this book took me a long time to get through, I wouldn't say it was boring. I did enjoy myself. I've seen the Outlander TV series. I like it. So I'm glad that I'm finally reading the books. But there's just something intimidating about these massive books with the teeny tiny print, and it just makes me want to avoid them. But once I actually forced myself to sit down and read the book, I got through it pretty quickly. I like the books more than the show, mainly because the books are a lot less graphic. I love Jamie and Claire's relationship, and in the books you just get so much more lore and romance and history. The second book spends a lot of time in the Rococo era of France. So of course it's full of the ridiculousness of French court fashion, the customs, the people. There's a decent amount of humor, and it's altogether a pretty enjoyable book. The only reason I didn't rate it 5 stars is because it didn't hold the same magic as book 1, which is pretty inevitable with sequels. Still a solid 4 star, but I'm now getting intimidated again by the next book because it's even longer than this one. The second one was 960, the third one is 1060, which feels so unnecessary. But the person who lent this series to me did say that the third book was so good that she stayed up all night reading, so I'm excited. Okay, Sword Heart. I've read a few other works by T. Kingfisher, a novella called Thornhedge and a novel called Nettle and Bone. So I knew picking up this book that I was in for a fun time. Sword Heart is fun, fast-paced, cozy, funny, romantic, which is exactly what the blurb promised, so no complaints there. It's about a widowed woman named Hulla, who is the sole inheritor of her uncle's estate and fortune, and he dies. And her evil in-laws will stop at nothing to get their hands on this inheritance, including forcing Hulla to marry her awful cousin and then killing her so that her cousin inherits everything. Secretly, Hulla writes a will stating that if she dies, all of her money will go to her nieces, and then she plans to kill herself as like a final to the evil in-laws. Unfortunately, the only weapon she can find in the house is this ancient sword because her uncle was an antiques collector. But when she unsheathes it, she releases the spirit of the sword, who just so happens to be a hot guy. His name is Sarkis, and he's kind of like a genie. He's immortal, he's bound to the sword and bound to serve the wielder of the sword. He helps Hulla escape, and they go on a journey to find a lawyer to help Hulla retain her inheritance and get her evil in-laws off her back. This is fun. It's so fun. It is the epitome of cozy fantasy. There are really low stakes, and it's really just a bunch of quirky characters going on a little quest. There's lots of fun little lore drops, and the characters are a great mix, and it just keeps it fun and entertaining. I especially liked the lawyer, Zale. Zale has this morbid curiosity with Sarkis and his connection to the sword, so embarks on a series of experiments to test Sarkis's capabilities and limits. They're trying to find out whether Sarkis is actually dead, because every time he gets injured, he just has to return to the sword and he regenerates, including like regenerating limbs that have been cut off. So Zale has Sarkis pee in a jar and then go back into the sword to test if his pee disappears. It's so silly. I love it. The only part of this book that prevented me from rating it 5 stars was Hulla. I liked her overall. It's really rare to see a middle-aged protagonist featured in a fantasy romance, so it was really refreshing and I loved that. But a big part of her character is she asks a lot of questions about everything, and it's even a reoccurring bit that the other characters get frustrated because she's asking questions all the time. There were so many times where the banter actually got kind of boring because it went on too long, and Hal was just constantly asking questions. It drove me up the wall. Other than that, the book is great. It reminded me a lot of Legends and Lattes, so if that's your vibe, you might want to check out this book. I definitely want to read more of Kingfisher's work because I like their fun fairy tale style. There is a fairly popular series, I think, called The Paladin's Grace, which has got really good reviews, so that might be next on my list. The last book of November was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. This is a seriously hyped, short translated Japanese novel, which I think sparked the whole obsession with these short Japanese novels with cats on the covers, even though there are no cats featured in the book. Very disappointed. That's actually a huge gripe I have with this book. Talk about false advertising. Before the Coffee Gets Cold takes place in a magical cafe where you can sit in this specific chair and be transported back in time. There are quite a few rules. You must remain in your seat. You can only meet people who have visited the cafe, and nothing you do in the past will change the future. The most important rule is that your time is limited. Once your coffee is poured, you get transported to the past, but you must drink your coffee before it gets cold or you will risk becoming a ghost that haunts the cafe. The book consists of 4 short stories about different different characters visiting the cafe and their reasons for visiting the past. I've read a few of these Japanese short story collections and I've really enjoyed them. The concepts are usually unique and interesting, and they are great to read in bite-sized pieces. Before the Coffee Gets Cold has a bit of a reminiscent, heavy, sad tone to it, but it does suit the concept and I thought it was really well done. I didn't enjoy this book as much as I thought I would, and I do think it's mainly due to the hype. This book is on every list, every ad, every post, and I see it everywhere with raving reviews, so I don't think I was wrong to have high expectations. I think if I had read this book when it had first started doing the rounds a few years ago, I would have had a different reaction, but as it stands, I've read similar books that are simply better. It's not a bad book, it just wasn't anything mind-blowing. My favorite of the 4 stories was the one about the woman who travels back in time to receive a letter from her husband who in the future has Alzheimer's. It was quite sad, but also quite hopeful, which pretty much sums up the entire book. In the end, I rated it 3.5 stars, which I still think is pretty high for what it is. I'd be interested in hearing what everyone else thinks about this book. Is it revolutionary? Is it boring? I'm still making up my mind. And that's everything I read in November. I don't usually read this much. I just seem to have an unusually productive month, so don't get your hopes up. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them. I always love hearing people's different opinions on books that I liked or disliked. Like I said at the top of the video, head over to Instagram and give me a follow for more book content. And you can even check me out on Storygraph to keep up with what I'm reading. Everything is linked down below. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.